What would happen if the founder himself had to go undercover as an employee to expose the traitor who was selling out his empire? Amelia Cross stood in the hotel bathroom, her eyes fixed on the cold mirror that reflected a face she barely recognized. The successful, confident woman whose proud gaze had once graced financial magazines was now just a faint shadow of herself, replaced by a woman with light brown dyed hair streaked with a few silver strands, cheap steel-rimmed glasses slipping down her nose, and a strangely weary look. The cheap blouse she had bought from a discount store and the faded khaki pants were carefully chosen, completely opposite to the luxurious suit she usually wore. Every detail on her face, from the neatly tied hair to the faint wrinkles created by makeup, was calculated to make it almost impossible for anyone to recognize her as the founder of Crossline Retail, a retail chain once hailed as one of the greatest success stories in the industry. In her trembling hand was a crumpled piece of paper with hastily scribbled words, "Be careful, they might be watching you." No sender's name, just slipped quietly under her hotel room door last night. The warning tightened her chest, her heart beating faster, but in her eyes was still that familiar, determined spark. She took a deep breath, placed the note on the sink, leaving it there as a reminder that there was no turning back from the path ahead. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been sitting in a glass-walled meeting room, discussing Crossline's global expansion strategy, proud of the empire she had built from scratch. But everything changed after a midnight message from Sarah Miller, her former HR director who had abruptly resigned without explanation. "Amelia, something is very wrong inside Crossline. If you don't step in, the company won't be yours much longer." When she met Sarah the next morning, the truth shattered her world. Unjust pay cuts, longtime employees fired without cause, soaring turnover rates, and worse suspicions that Elijah Crane, once her most trusted right-hand man, was secretly manipulating the books to sell the company to an outside investment group. Sarah had been fired after trying to investigate, even forced to sign a resignation letter forged with Amelia's own name. Each detail burned her with anger and pain. Crossline wasn't just a company, it was her father's dream, the sweat and tears of hundreds of people who believed in her vision, the reason she had sacrificed her youth to turn a small store into a national brand. And now, because of misplaced trust, it was turning into a soulless machine, rotting from the inside. Amelia lowered her head, fastening the buttons on her blouse, adjusting her glasses with movements that were calm but resolute, as if reaffirming her decision. The woman in the mirror was no longer Amelia Cross, founder of Crossline Retail, a symbol of success with confident posture and a commanding voice at press conferences. This woman was now just an ordinary employee named Mina Cole, who had just applied for a job at one of Crossline's flagship stores. She had to blend in completely, to see firsthand and hear for herself what was happening under the perfect facade Elijah Crane had built. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the fake ID Sarah had prepared, but her gaze didn't waver. A memory flashed the day Crossline first opened 15 years ago, when her father handed her the first check to start the business. His eyes filled with pride. "Don't just build something big, build something meaningful, something you and everyone else can be proud of." That promise bound her. She couldn't step back, couldn't let greedy hands trample on the ideals she and her father had fought for. Amelia gripped the strap of her bag tightly, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the bathroom, ready for the biggest role of her life. A role without a script, without props, where even the smallest mistake could make everything collapse. But she had chosen to play this game, because if she didn't, Crossline would no longer be Crossline, and Amelia Cross would have nothing left to protect. That morning, the sky was covered in a pale gray layer of clouds, reflecting the heavy weight in Amelia Cross's heart as she stood before the glass doors of the Crossline Retail branch, a place that had once been the beating heart of the empire she built. The familiar blue sign still hung there, but the electronic letters flickered weakly. Several bulbs burned out, making the word Crossline look more like a dried-out carcass than a symbol of trust and quality. She took a deep breath, adjusted her glasses, tightened the strap of her bag, and stepped inside, the automatic door screeching with a harsh, poorly maintained sound. The moment she crossed the threshold, a burnt plastic smell mixed with the sting of cheap cleaning products hit her nose, a sharp contrast to the gentle scent of coffee and orange room spray she had once insisted every store must have. The sight inside made her heart ache. The counters were messy, shelves were poorly arranged, many compartments were empty, and posters were hanging crookedly as if no one cared to fix them. A staff member in a worn-out uniform walked past, his face dull and eyes fixed on the floor, not even offering a smile to customers, a stark contrast to the friendly customer service cross-line used to be proud of. Raised voices echoed from the self-checkout area where a middle-aged woman was arguing loudly with a malfunctioning machine while the nearby employee simply backed away, no one stepping in to help. In a corner, a child cried loudly, tugging at his mother's sleeve in desperation, but the surrounding employees only glanced briefly before turning away as if they had grown used to ignoring everything beyond their own tasks. Amelia stood there, forcing herself to maintain the calm demeanor of a new employee waiting for an interview, but inside her, waves of anger surged. This had once been the place where she spent countless sleepless nights arranging every product, personally choosing every tiny detail. She remembered vividly, 15 years ago, when this store first opened. She had painted each section of the wall herself, carefully choosing the shade of blue for the checkout counters to create a sense of comfort for customers, even writing the first announcements on the chalkboard with her own hand. Walking to a shelf near the wall, she gently placed her hand on an old wooden corner, her gaze stopping at a faint, nearly invisible carved mark. AC. The initials of her name, carved years ago as a promise to protect this creation. Now it was covered in dust, almost erased, along with the bright ideals it once symbolized. She clenched her fists tightly, her nails digging into her palms to suppress her emotions. She had to stay calm. She had to play the role of a new hire, just an ordinary person, not Amelia Cross filled with rage, ready to scream at everyone, "What have you done to this dream?" A tired young employee emerged from the reception desk holding a tablet, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. He looked at Amelia, forcing a strained smile. "You're here for the interview, right? Sorry for the wait, we're short-staffed, it's a bit chaotic today." Amelia nodded, returning the strained smile with a polite one, answering softly, "It's fine. I understand." But inside, her heart tightened. This place, once filled with laughter where employees proudly called it their second home, had now become a place people dragged themselves to, only for meager paychecks. Amelia stood still, her eyes sweeping over employees shuffling about silently, no one greeting each other, no smiles, no trace of passion. She knew she was facing far more than empty shelves or outdated signs. What she had to confront was a culture rotting from its very roots. Taking a deep breath, she adjusted the strap of her bag and walked toward the interview room at the end of the hallway. It was time to see the bigger picture of this collapse, because if she couldn't bear to face it with her own eyes, she would never find a way to save what she had built with her own hands. Amelia sat in the cramped employee break room, her hands clasped tightly on her lap, trying to appear nervous in the way a job applicant waiting for an interview would. The once white walls had turned a dull yellow, and the fluorescent light above flickered constantly, humming with an irritating buzz. In front of her sat an old plastic table, stained with dried coffee marks that had been there for who knows how long. The room was so quiet that the droning of the air conditioner filled every corner, yet the low whispers leaking through the thin wall behind her cut sharply through the silence, making Amelia's heart sink. She hadn't intended to listen at first, but the very first words made her blood run cold. "Tonight at the Aurora Hotel, Elijah has everything ready." A woman's voice, quick, urgent, filled with tension. Then came a deeper male voice, laced with a mocking chuckle. "Are you sure about this? What if someone discovers those offshore accounts?" The woman cut him off immediately, her tone icy. "She'll never find out. Amelia Cross is just a name on paper now. Here, Elijah is the one in control. Amelia froze, every muscle in her body tightening as if any sudden movement would give away her presence. She tilted her head slightly, focusing all her attention on the conversation. The man spoke again, this time almost whispering, "What about the board of directors? They're not stupid." A short, sharp laugh answered him. "Elijah has it all arranged. They'll see the losses, the skyrocketing turnover rate, a sinking ship. When Sunridge makes its offer to buy, they'll be fighting to say yes, and by then she'll have nothing left." The words felt like a blade plunging straight into Amelia's chest. Elijah Crane, the man she had trusted more than anyone, the man she had once treated like her protege, the man who had promised to protect Crossline as if it were her own dream, was plotting to sell everything out. She took a slow breath, trying to keep it steady, but her heart was pounding so hard she feared they might hear it through the thin wall. Footsteps began to move on the other side, growing distant. The woman's voice drifted one last time, softer, but still clear enough for Amelia to hear. "Tonight is the night. After this meeting, she'll be nothing but the past." Then silence returned, leaving only the monotonous hum of the air conditioner filling the room again. Amelia sat motionless, her fingers clutching the fabric of her skirt, a chill crawling down her spine. Every suspicion was now confirmed, and it was worse than she had ever imagined. Elijah wasn't just trying to take over the company, he was deliberately destroying it from the inside, making its sale look like a justified rescue. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, her mind racing through a storm of thoughts. Sarah had been right, everything was rotten to the core, and Elijah wasn't just betraying her, he was betraying the hundreds of people who had believed in the vision she built. A slow-burning anger rose in her chest, but Amelia forced it down. This wasn't the time to lose control. The break room door suddenly opened, and a young employee with dark circles under his eyes stepped in, holding a stack of papers. "You're Mina Cole, right? The interview's done. We'd like to hire you. You can start as soon as tomorrow." He offered her a weary smile, the kind of forced courtesy of someone too exhausted to hide his indifference. Amelia looked up, returning a faint smile that perfectly matched the joy of someone desperate for work. "Thank you, I'll be here on time." But behind that polite smile, her eyes burned with a cold, unwavering resolve. Tomorrow she would officially step into this place, into the world Elijah had turned into a pit of filth. And from inside that pit, she would drag him into the light, no matter the cost. At 6:25 the next morning, Amelia, under the guise of Mina Cole, stood at the employee entrance behind the store. The early morning air was biting cold, yet no one smiled or greeted each other. Everyone stood in a straight line, eyes cast downward, as if a single sideways glance could bring trouble. Exactly at 6:30, the door swung open, and out stepped a tall woman, her posture perfectly straight, her gray suit pressed so sharply it caught the dim light, her face devoid of even the faintest wrinkle, as if she had never smiled if she ever did. Susan Hale, the regional manager personally appointed by Elijah Crane, appeared like a cold blade. Her eyes swept across every face, pausing on Amelia for a brief second before she spoke in a dry, clipped tone. "Name." Amelia played her role perfectly, answering simply, "Mina Cole." Susan raised an eyebrow, her voice sharp as ice. "You're late." Amelia glanced at her watch, startled. "But the schedule says 6:30. Susan cut her off instantly. "New policy. You start 5 minutes before your shift to prepare. This is your first time, so consider this a warning. Next time it will be recorded as a violation." No one around spoke up for her. The silence was heavy, and a few coworkers cast Amelia sympathetic, worried looks as if to say, "Don't argue, or it will only get worse." Training began in a small room where the walls were plastered with lifeless motivational posters. No room for mistakes. Efficiency is everything. The fluorescent light blazed harshly, reflecting the tense expressions of every employee. Susan stood rigidly like a military officer, her voice even, but each word cutting like a blade. "Here, we don't need slow workers. Anyone who doesn't meet targets in 2 weeks will be replaced. No exceptions. No one is irreplaceable. Amelia glanced around, noticing a young woman sitting in the corner, her curly brown hair a messy halo of stress, her hands trembling so much she could barely write a word. The crooked name tag on her chest read, Emily Ward. Midway through the session, Susan abruptly barked, "Ward, explain why you were off position for 15 minutes yesterday." Emily jolted, standing quickly, her voice trembling. I had a stomachache. I only went to the restroom." Susan cut her off without hesitation. "The restroom is not a break room. The policy is clear. Any time away from your post must be recorded on the timesheet. You failed to do so. That is a violation." Emily bit her lip, her eyes welling with tears as she tried to explain. "But I didn't mean to." Susan's eyes were icy, her tone even harsher. "A violation is a violation. This is your final warning. One more, and you will be considered for replacement." Amelia tightened her grip on her pen, heat burning in her chest as she watched Emily lower her head, her hands gripping the hem of her shirt so tightly her knuckles turned white, fighting back tears. The room was suffocatingly silent. No one dared speak. No one dared to even breathe too loudly. They were like puppets controlled by fear. By the end of the session, Susan handed out thick stacks of documents to each person, her voice like a command. "Memorize all these regulations. Anyone who fails to answer correctly when I test you will be immediately marked for violation." She left the room without a single farewell, leaving behind an atmosphere as heavy as if a trial had just ended. Amelia remained seated for a few seconds, watching Emily quietly fold the stack of papers onto her lap, her eyes filled with despair. As Susan stepped out the door, a few employees exhaled quietly in relief, as if they had just been spared, but no one dared to speak. In that moment, Amelia understood that Crossline's problems were not just financial fraud or falsified reports. What was truly killing the company was a culture of fear that had taken root deep inside, turning once proud employees into people who knew only how to keep their heads down and endure. And Elijah Crane, the man behind it all, was the one who had planted that poisonous seed. She took a deep breath, forcing her anger down. This was only the first day. She had to stay in character, had to witness more, because only by touching the truth directly could she rip away the mask they were hiding behind. But deep in her eyes, a fire had already begun to burn, a fire that would consume everyone who had turned Crossline into a place this lifeless. That afternoon, the air in the store felt heavier than usual. The only sounds cutting through the oppressive silence were the monotonous beeps of barcodes scanned at the checkout counters and the soft slap of employees' shoes against the plastic floor. Amelia, still playing her role as Mina Cole, was assigned to reorganize the shelves in the home goods section, but her eyes kept flicking toward the hallway leading to the manager's office. The frosted glass door was slightly ajar, and even from this distance, she could make out the hunched figure of a middle-aged woman inside Linda Moore. Linda had been with Crossline for over 10 years, something Amelia knew from the files Sarah had sent her before this mission. She was exactly the kind of employee Amelia had always valued, dedicated, attentive, often praised by customers for her kindness. But now she was being forced out of the very place to which she had given half her life. Susan Hale's cold, cutting voice carried clearly through the frosted glass, making Amelia's brow furrow slightly. "Linda, we checked the cameras. 2 promotional gift cards were found in your cleaning cart. You didn't report them. That is considered company property theft." Linda's voice trembled as she tried to explain, weak but still desperate to be heard. "I found them on the floor in the break room, Susan. I planned to return them at the end of my shift, but I didn't have time yet." Susan interrupted without a hint of emotion. "Rules are rules. I've already prepared a voluntary resignation form for you. Sign it, or I'll escalate this to the legal department. If I do, you won't just lose your job, you'll be prosecuted." Amelia's grip on the shelf tightened, her knuckles whitening as she fought to contain her anger. Through the blurred glass, she could see Linda bowing her head, her trembling hands clutching the pen. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say more, but in the end, she signed the paper Susan had placed in front of her. Her handwriting was so shaky it looked broken, and as soon as she finished, she gently set the pen down, her shoulders collapsing as if her soul had been drained. Susan nodded, gathering the paper as though completing nothing more than a routine administrative task. Good. Thank you for your service at Crossline. HR will process your final paycheck. Her tone was flat, devoid of emotion, as if she were addressing a machine that had simply reached its expiration date. When Linda stepped out of the office, a security guard was already waiting. She carried a small bag, walking slowly, like a shadow. People around glanced at her. Some lowered their eyes with pity, but no one dared to move closer. Fear had become a straitjacket binding them all. Amelia forced herself to remain calm, but inside, a fire raged. She bit her lips slightly, taking a deep breath to suppress her fury. She had to stay in character, had to remain silent. She needed to gather more evidence before tearing all of this apart. But as Linda passed by, their eyes met for a brief moment. Linda's eyes were filled with despair and humiliation, yet within them was a faint, silent plea, as if whispering, "Someone, please stop them." That look pierced straight into Amelia's heart. In that instant, she swore to herself that Linda would not be forgotten, and that every single person turning Crossline into a place that crushed loyal workers like her would pay for it. She tightened her grip on the fake employee badge hanging around her neck, feeling the cold, hard plastic press against her skin, a reminder that she was part of this brutal game now, a game where one small mistake could make her share Linda's fate. But Amelia had no way back. Every step she took from now on was not only to save a company, but to bring justice to the people being buried alive under this toxic culture. That evening, after work hours, when most of the employees had already left, Amelia stayed behind in the storage room under the pretense of additional inventory checks. Susan Hale didn't question it, only shot her a cold glance before leaving, the sharp clicks of her heels on the floor sounding like a judge's gavel striking in rhythm. When the back door slammed shut, Amelia exhaled, glancing around. The storage room was so quiet she could hear the thudding of her own heartbeat. This was her chance. She began searching through the old filing shelves lined against the inner wall. The weak yellow light cast shadows across the room, illuminating particles of dust swirling in the air, making her eyes sting. Amelia moved slowly, each wooden drawer creaking dryly as she pulled it open, revealing piles of old inventory reports, staff logs, and countless meaningless papers. But then, when she reached the last drawer in the corner, her hand brushed against a small brown cardboard box hastily shoved under an old promotional board. The box was covered in dust, its corners worn, and sealed clumsily with clear tape, as if someone had hidden it in a rush. Amelia crouched down, her heartbeat quickening as she opened the box. Inside, among stacks of disorganized papers, was a scratched black USB drive with no label. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted it, the dim yellow light reflecting off its surface, making it look like a priceless piece of evidence in a murder case. She quickly glanced around the room, then plugged the USB into the old computer at the corner of the storage room, the one usually used for inventory checks. The screen flickered, then displayed a list of folders with short, dry names. BCTQ1, Adjust Report, Internal Only. Amelia opened them one by one, her eyes scanning the rows of figures, but after only a few lines, a chill ran down her spine. The numbers were clear. Profits reported lower than reality, employee bonuses redirected as non-essential expenses, and wage cuts disguised as necessary adjustments for financial stability. More damning were the two parallel columns on every report, one labeled actual and one labeled adjusted. She didn't need to be a financial expert to know these were undeniable proof of systemic fraud. What made her breath catch was the small text at the bottom of each page, approved by EC Elijah Crane. Amelia leaned back from the screen, her fists clenching so tightly that her nails dug into her palms, drawing tiny spots of blood she didn't even notice. She had trusted Elijah, had given him control of domestic operations while she focused on international expansion. And now that digital signature was irrefutable proof. Elijah hadn't just betrayed her, he was deliberately sabotaging Crossline to justify selling it. She continued scrolling through the folders and found reports scanned with red pen notes. Do not upload to system send adjusted version only, along with several internal email attachments containing chilling instructions. Complete adjustments by the 15th. Ensure figures reflect losses. Sender, Elijah Crane. Recipient, Susan Hale. The sound of distant footsteps in the hallway yanked Amelia back to reality. She quickly pulled the USB out, slipping it into the pocket of her cheap blouse, and pretended to be checking a nearby box of goods. The storage door opened slightly, and a tired young employee poked his head in. "Mina, you done yet? I'm locking up." Amelia forced a small, strained smile. "Yeah, I'm coming." When he left, Amelia stood still for a few seconds, taking a deep breath to calm herself. In her pocket now was the most crucial piece to exposing Elijah, but she also knew she was stepping deeper into a dangerous game. If Susan or anyone else found out, her fate could be the same as Linda's crushed without mercy. Amelia zipped her pocket, her eyes glinting with cold determination. She whispered to herself, "Tonight Sarah needs to get this." Because if she was even one step too late, all this data could be wiped clean, and Crossline's only chance of being saved would vanish forever. The next morning, the atmosphere in the store was heavier than ever. From the moment Amelia stepped into the employee break room, she could feel something was different. The few glances directed at her carried a sense of caution, and some people avoided her altogether, unwilling to start a conversation like they had before. The tension made her feel as if every step she took was on thin ice. She sat down on an old plastic chair, pretending to be calm as she tied her shoelaces, but her heart was pounding violently in her chest. Only a few minutes later, the door swung open sharply, and Susan Hale walked in. Following behind her was another woman, slender, with perfectly tied hair and thin silver-rimmed glasses that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights. Patricia Lewis. Amelia had heard her name from Sarah before, Elijah's most trusted right hand, notorious for her ability to eliminate anyone who didn't fit his plans. Patricia didn't speak right away. She stopped in the middle of the room, her eyes sweeping slowly over everyone as if scanning for any telltale expression. Then her gaze stopped on Amelia. A thin smile curved her lips, not friendly, but the kind of smile a predator wears when it spots its prey. "You're Mina Cole, correct?" Patricia asked, her voice soft, almost falsely sweet. Amelia stood, nodding politely, keeping her tone humble. "Yes, that's me." Patricia stepped closer, now only a few steps away, the faint scent of expensive perfume lingering around her. "I just reviewed your file," Patricia said, her tone still even but her eyes sharp as glass. "Salem, Oregon. The store you worked at closed over a year ago, correct?" Amelia clenched her hands inside her pockets, forcing her expression to remain neutral. "That's right. I worked there before it shut down." Patricia tilted her head, her gaze cutting like a blade. "Strange, though. I called the number listed for your former manager, Laura Jensen. But now, that number belongs to a flower shop." She stressed the last word like a deliberate test. For a split second, Amelia felt the blood drain from her face, but she took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "I wouldn't know," she said evenly, adding a small, polite smile. "I haven't been in touch with her since I left. Maybe she changed her number." Patricia didn't blink, her sharp eyes holding Amelia's for a few tense seconds before she smiled again, but the smile held no warmth. "Of course. Probably just a coincidence." She turned and headed toward the door, her voice soft but laced with quiet threat. "I'll confirm it this afternoon. Don't worry, Mina. I'm very good at finding the truth." The room seemed to lose all air after those words. As Patricia left, Susan shot Amelia a cold glance, as if she had already placed her on a list of people to be removed. Amelia sat back down, forcing herself to remain composed, but inside, adrenaline surged through her like a crashing wave. She knew Patricia wouldn't let this go. She would investigate every detail, and even the smallest mistake could expose Amelia's true identity. During lunch break, Amelia slipped into the restroom, locking herself in a stall. She pulled the phone from her hidden pocket and typed a quick message to Sarah. "My file is under suspicion. Patricia is checking. Need verification now." Just seconds later, Sarah replied, "I'll handle it, but be careful. Patricia is dangerous." Amelia tucked her phone away, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Sweat dotted her forehead. She whispered firmly to herself, "I won't let them win." She knew that from this moment on, every step, every word might be watched. This was no longer just about collecting evidence. It had turned into a real hunt, one where she was both the hunter and the prey. That afternoon, the storage room was bathed in weak yellow light, the heavy smell of dust and old paper hanging thick in the air. Amelia pretended to be checking inventory, her eyes occasionally darting toward the door, her heart pounding fast because she knew even the smallest mistake could deepen Patricia's suspicion. The slow, deliberate sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, making her hold her breath. But when the figure that appeared was Jason Reed, the mid-level manager Sarah had once mentioned, she finally exhaled in relief. Jason looked every bit like an exhausted employee, his uniform wrinkled, but his eyes flicked quickly toward Amelia, giving her a discreet signal. Jason approached, holding a stack of files as if they were discussing work, but his voice dropped so low it was barely audible. "You don't have much time," he murmured, his eyes still fixed on the list in his hand. "Elijah has changed the plan. Tonight, he's meeting 2 Sunridge executives at the Bellevue penthouse. If he signs the deal, everything you have will be useless. After that, he'll legitimize all the fabricated data." Amelia clenched her fist inside her pocket, her eyes flashing with a mix of tension and determination. "What about the board of directors?" Jason gave a faint shake of his head. "He's already prepared for them. The false reports will be presented right after the meeting. They'll believe the company is bleeding money and agree to sell." He paused for a beat, his gaze heavy. "You have to get there. You need direct evidence. One statement, one recording, anything that can bring him down immediately." Amelia bit her lip, her mind racing through scenarios. She wasn't afraid of facing Elijah, but sneaking into a high-level, tightly secured meeting was like stepping into a lion's den. "And you?" she asked, her voice so low it was almost a whisper. Jason met her eyes, his look filled with both worry and resolve. "I'll help. But you need to understand this. Elijah doesn't let anyone who betrays him walk away. If he finds out who you really are, you won't make it out alive." Amelia gave a slight nod, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "Can you get me in?" Jason glanced around cautiously, then slipped a slightly scratched silver access card from his pocket. He placed it in the stack of files and pushed it toward her with a casual motion. "Service pass. It will get you through the freight elevator. I arranged for no checks for 1 hour. After that, you're on your own." Amelia took the card, her fingers gripping it tightly like it was the last lifeline to save Crossline. "Thank you," she said quietly, though her eyes burned with icy determination. Jason didn't respond, only sighed, pretending to flip through the documents as if discussing inventory. Just before leaving, he added in a hushed tone, "Mina, no. Amelia, if you fail, erase everything. Don't let them know I helped you." The storage room door closed behind Jason, leaving Amelia alone in the dim light. She stared at the card in her hand, her palm damp with sweat, but her eyes were unwavering with resolve. Tonight would decide everything. She glanced at the clock. Less than 4 hours before the meeting. Her mind raced, mapping out every step, every escape route, every word she might need to say. There was no turning back. Elijah Crane had destroyed too much, and now he would face the truth himself. Amelia slipped the card into her pocket, zipping it tight as if locking all her fear inside. As she walked out of the storage room, her head held high and her steps calm like any other employee, her heart pounded like the drumbeat of war. Tonight, she wasn't just fighting to save a company. She was fighting for justice for Linda, for Emily, for everyone crushed under this tyrannical system, and she swore, no matter the cost, Elijah Crane would pay. That night, the Bellevue penthouse glowed under warm golden lights, looking elegant and serene, giving no hint of the dirty deal being arranged inside. Amelia stood in the shadows of the service area, wearing a gray uniform and a cap that hid part of her face. The service pass Jason had given her was clutched tightly in her sweaty palm. A security guard walked by without suspicion as she carefully pushed a cart covered with a white cloth, concealing a mini camera and a small recording device hidden beneath. The freight elevator carried her up to the 40th floor, where Elijah Crane's penthouse glowed brightly. When the doors slid open, Amelia quietly pushed the cart into a carpeted hallway, each step heavy, as if every move was a gamble. Stopping just short of the main door, she subtly adjusted the tiny camera hidden in her shirt clip to face directly toward the room. The frosted glass reflected her image, not a powerful CEO, but a simple delivery worker. The door was unlocked, with staff still coming and going. She slipped in, positioning herself behind a large wooden screen, only a few steps from the meeting table. From there, she saw Elijah Crane, the man she had once trusted without question, leaning casually against a leather chair, holding a glass of red wine, his expression infuriatingly smug. Across from him sat two men in black suits, representatives from Sunridge, listening intently as Elijah spoke confidently. "All you need to do is sign," Elijah said, his tone dripping arrogance, "and Crossline will officially belong to Sunridge. I've prepared everything: loss reports, turnover rates, financial errors, all perfectly legal on paper." One of the men raised an eyebrow, asking quietly, "And the former owner? What about her?" Elijah smirked, raising his wineglass like a victor toasting his triumph. "Amelia Cross is just the past. She'll never have enough proof to come back. After tonight, all the old data will be erased permanently." Amelia's chest tightened at his words, but she stayed still, her hand gripping the small recorder in her pocket. Elijah's voice lowered, growing more self-satisfied. "You have nothing to worry about. I already have a scapegoat lined up for the minor discrepancies. A mid-level manager, Jason Reed. He'll take the blame for manipulating the books. The board will never question it." Heat rose to Amelia's face, her blood boiling. Jason had risked everything to help her, yet Elijah was ready to destroy him like he was just a disposable pawn. But she couldn't act now. She had to wait. Wait until Elijah condemned himself with his own words. And he did, every sentence, every arrogant admission, leaving no room for denial. When Elijah finally picked up the pen to sign the contract, Amelia stepped out from behind the screen. The sound of her soft-soled shoes on the carpet was still enough to make Elijah turn. His eyes widened for a split second, then narrowed, filled with surprise and anger. "You," Elijah hissed, his voice low, his words bitten off. "Amelia." She stood tall, removing her cap and thick glasses. The overhead lights reflected on her face, revealing eyes sharp with cold determination. "That's right, Elijah," she said, her voice firm and steady. "It's me. And you just confessed to everything in front of the entire board." Elijah hesitated, then let out a bitter laugh. "You think a few words will bring me down?" But before he could continue, the penthouse door burst open. Two FBI agents walked in, followed by three members of the board and Olivia Bennett, the senior executive Amelia had worked closely with for years. Olivia raised a tablet, replaying the live audio. "I've prepared everything. Loss reports. Amelia Cross is just the past." Elijah's face drained of color. One of the FBI agents stepped forward, his voice clear and commanding. "Elijah Crane, you are under arrest for financial fraud, book manipulation, and conspiracy to embezzle corporate assets." Cold steel handcuffs locked around his wrists as Elijah shouted in desperation, "This is my company. I saved it from her." But no one paid him any attention. Amelia stood still, her eyes fixed on him. "No," she said quietly but firmly enough for him to hear. "It was never yours, and Crossline doesn't need someone like you to survive." Elijah was led away, leaving the bright room in heavy silence. Amelia took a slow, deep breath, feeling the crushing weight on her shoulders finally lift, even if just a little. But she knew this was only the beginning, because saving a company wasn't just about removing a traitor. It was about healing the people who had been broken by it. The first rays of dawn streamed through the tall glass windows of Crossline headquarters. The grand lobby glowed with a different kind of light that morning, no longer cold and soulless as before. Instead, it was alive with smiles, employees walking with heads held high, talking to one another, their eyes bright with renewed trust. Amelia Cross stood at the window of the top-floor conference room, gazing down at the scene below, her eyes filled with emotions hard to describe, part pride, part deep gratitude. Since the night Elijah Crane was arrested, Crossline had gone through days of chaos. Emergency meetings, internal investigations, and the exposure of real financial records, it was like a massive surgery to cut away the rot that had been eating away at the company from within. Amelia worked tirelessly alongside her new team, rebuilding policy by policy, report by report. But what made her most proud was not the financial recovery taking shape, but the people employees who had been crushed by fear and oppression now regaining their dignity and their belief in the company. That morning, the main conference room was packed, not only with executives, but with employee representatives from branches across the country. At the center of the room stood a new banner, its bold letters declaring, "We don't just build business, we build people." It was a saying Amelia and her father had lived by since the early days of Crossline, and now it had become the company's official mission. Amelia stepped up to the podium, not in her usual powerful business suit, but in a simple white shirt. She looked around the room, meeting the expectant eyes of people who had once suffered under Susan and Elijah's rule. Emily Ward sat in the front row, her familiar curly hair still slightly messy, but her face looked healthier, brighter, her eyes shining when Amelia smiled at her. Linda Moore was also there, in a neat new uniform, her once trembling hands now resting steadily on her lap. Amelia's voice, warm but filled with determination, carried across the room. Crossline was never just built with bricks and signs. It was built on trust and the dedication of every person here. We lost that once, but today we are taking it back together. Scattered applause began, growing louder as she continued. Every employee wrongfully terminated under Elijah's management will be reinstated and compensated. A new support program will ensure no one is left behind because of personal hardships. And most importantly, your voices will always be heard. A soft sob broke out from the back row, followed by nods of agreement and teary smiles. Emily looked at Amelia, her eyes glistening, as if saying thank you on behalf of everyone. Linda wiped her tears, her hands clenching firmly, her expression filled with resolve. The meeting ended with long, heartfelt applause. When Amelia stepped into the main lobby, she saw Jason Reed leaning against the glass wall, his expression tired but relieved. "You should take a few days off," Amelia said, her tone softer than usual. Jason gave her a faint smile, the first in weeks. "Only when I'm sure you don't need me to worry anymore." They exchanged a knowing look, no words needed, both understanding this was just the beginning. That afternoon, Amelia visited Crossline's very first store, the place where it had all started. The automatic doors opened smoothly, the soft chime ringing cheerfully, so different from the harsh creak she had heard weeks ago. The greeter at the entrance smiled warmly, and in the corner, Linda was teaching a new employee how to organize the shelves, her voice calm but confident. Emily was helping an elderly customer check a product, her bright smile lighting up her face. Amelia paused at the familiar wooden counter where she had once carved the initials AC long ago. She placed her hand gently on it, brushing the fresh layer of paint, still able to feel the faint grooves of her carving underneath. For the first time in months, her heart felt full, filled with a quiet peace. She stepped outside, standing under the soft golden glow of the setting sun. Crossline had once lost its soul, but now it was alive again, not just through new policies, but through the people who once again believed in each other. And Amelia knew that her father, if he were alive, would be proud of this moment. She smiled faintly, turning to leave, her steps light, as if she had finally laid down the weight she had carried for so long. Crossline had been saved, but more importantly, it had found its soul again. A company may survive because of numbers, but it can only thrive when people are placed at its heart. The true power of a leader does not lie in control, but in inspiring trust and restoring dignity to those who walk alongside them. If you believe that kindness is the foundation of success, Hit like and subscribe to join us in spreading stories that change the business world with heart. And don't forget to leave a comment with the words "Keep the Faith," because sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to keep the faith to save an entire dream.